Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 11th episode of Beyond Talking Points. This is going to be the big Waco episode. Um, so, this is going to be fun. We both watched a documentary that was posted on YouTube about Waco. Both of us are definitely on the younger end, which means Waco happened around when we were born to just before we were born. And somehow it's a thing that people in the mainstream just never talk about. Um, Waco wasn't put on my radar at all until I heard an interview of David Thibodeau, who's one of the Branch Davidian survivors, on the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast, and then I checked out his book to hear all about it. Um, but pretty much the only thing I knew about it was the episode of South Park that makes fun of it going into the episode, into learning about Waco as a whole. So me and Matt both watched a documentary that's about 2 hours. I will say the documentary was very pro Branch Davidian, which I think rightfully so, but it was definitely not the most. It wasn't a even take. But we have a lot of opinions on it, and it has a lot of there's a lot of tangents we can go on it, and it's an interesting thing to think about when we talk about government and politics and the world. And I'm Matt Keck, and I'm gonna let my co-host Matt. He can maybe talk about his feelings about the FBI and the ATF, and we're just gonna start from there. We're gonna go down a bunch of rabbit holes this episode, and we're gonna see where it takes us because there's just so many things about Waco you can talk about. So yeah, the floor is yours to just kind of start where you think we should.
Thank you. I would like to start. I remember watching a 3-hour interview on C-SPAN with the late Christopher Hitchens, and he was asked about his views on the FBI. And I bring this up because his views are pretty much my views. He was very anti-FBI. He thought the whole organization should be abolished and padlocked and just completely begun again. He thought that he thought not only was the FBI ineffective, it was counterproductive. That the FBI more often than not shot America in the foot, even though it's supposed to protect America. And if you really, it's been that way for quite a long time, perhaps the whole history of the organization itself, but certainly, in the past 50 years or so. The FBI, remember, this is the organization which tried to get Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I won't now. There's even evidence, and I'm pretty sure this is public record. The FBI could have done a lot more to prevent 9/11. Now, I'm not saying 9/11 wasn't an inside job. The government didn't orchestrate it. Blah 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 blah. But there was clearly someone dropped the ball there. It's not that. It's hard to imagine in some ways how it happened under the watch of the most powerful intelligence agency in the world. I guess I'll let you jump in here. I think that's a good starting place.
Well, building off that too, and to tie that into Waco, is part of what was so crazy about everything that happened at Waco was how manufactured it was. Because David Koresh could have been arrested by government officials when he wasn't at his compound. He could have been arrested at a store. He wasn't holed up in his compound 24/7. They could have staked it out. He could have left, and they could have arrested him. But instead, they had decided, they had made the decision that they wanted to raid the whole compound, do a whole thing because they believed they were stockpiling guns, and they had evidence they were stockpiling guns. Which, if you think David Koresh is like a true threat, if you think he's legitimately leading a crazed cult and he's stockpiling guns, and you could take out their leader when he's not there peacefully, why would you assume that you had? Well, it wouldn't be a good idea to raid it then. So I mean, the documentary we watched, it talked a little bit about maybe some underlying political, some like politics they were playing by doing the raid, and it definitely did not go the way the Clinton administration wanted it to go. But it was definitely manufactured. I mean, to talk about like you can talk about the FBI not acting on evidence to prevent 9/11, but Waco was them directly acting in a way that started this whole siege. Like everything was done by the government, and it didn't have to happen that way. And I think that's the real tragedy of it all. Because by the time you get to the end of the documentary and you see the absolute, like you see the compound burst in flames, and you know about all the kids that died in there and got tear gassed and all that stuff, it could have been completely avoided if they just took their profit into custody and then you just let the group fall apart. But they didn't do that. And it's probably like one of the greatest failures of government in United States history, and nobody talks about it. Um, Now, I don't know if that's specifically like I don't know a ton specifically about the FBI domestically to comment more broadly, but I think this alone is a great example of like people trying to use the ATF and these government agencies with authority for incorrect purposes, and they're doing it in an inefficient way that puts Americans' lives at risk. Um, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Waco is a very interesting test case because, at least it's very interesting from my perspective, given my worldview, because it basically is a fight between two groups that I don't like. So the FBI, and then a crackpot religious organization. And I don't know. We can probably talk a little more about the FBI, so I won't go too much into I won't go into my anti-religion tirade for this at this moment. But I mean, obviously, I personally, for example, don't have any good feelings about the late David Koresh. Anyone who claims to be the son of God or a son or sent by God or a prophet, I'm very skeptical, and those people should be rightly laughed out of the room. He and I suspect that many of the accusations made against him are true, namely that he was hoarding weapons, that he was abusive to young children, sexually abusive to young children in the compound, in his religion, in his religious circle. But that still doesn't. It still has to be said that the government handled it, abysmally. And as you say, you just have to realize, what about all the innocent children that died at Waco? That they really, you can't blame them. Because I think it was if I remember correctly, I read an article in which it quoted Bill Clinton as saying something about, the FBI can't be responsible for crazy lunatics, religious lunatics killing themselves. Well, can you say that about the children? I mean, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. And obviously, so I think the FBI was probably trying to make an example of Waco, or of this religious cult. They were probably trying to kind of assert their dominance, show their guns. And of course, another part of it too was, before the long siege, there had been some gunfire between the two. Now, whether the Davidian shot first or the FBI shot first or the ATF shot first, we're not quite sure. But I'm certain that after that, the iron entered into their soul at that point, and they were just like, they killed some of our own. We're going to war. It became a personal thing with the FBI.
Yeah,
and the ATF.
Yeah. So the thing I wanted to ask, because I guess this was a question that pops on my radar, is like, it's easy to say, the FBI does all these things that are wrong, and the ATF clearly handled this poorly. But you described it as two groups you don't like, a cult. I'm gonna call them a cult whether I think about it or not. I don't know if I defend that. I don't know all the details, but I'm going to use the derogatory term cult because I'm just a crude person, so I'm just gonna call it a cult. Um, you got a religious zealot who's leading a cult, and then you got the ATF and the FBI. Now, in my mind, I they seem to make it pretty clear in that documentary that the ATF and the FBI were taking some of their marching orders directly from the White House. So if you pit one side as saying I don't like either of these sides, you're talking about a group that's doing what the government and the head of the government told them to do. So I feel like to some extent, because you generally defend the state, you kind of need to, and I'm pretty sure you're not a Second Amendment purist, and they made actions based on the fact that they knew that the Branch Davidians had a lot of guns stockpiled. I feel like to some extent there has to be a way of you at least justifying the raid, and I can't really justify the raid at all because to me it's these people doing a thing, and then the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, comes in and wreaks havoc. I don't think the ATF should exist. Period. Because I don't think there should really be any regulations on firearms. Um, so I'm not sure if you've had any thoughts. I guess trying to reconcile how you do think like in a way, all of Waco is just gun grabbing. It's gun grabbing, or at least that's their excuse. Is you guys have a lot of guns, we're gonna take them because you shouldn't have them. And then this is what happened. So, do you have any thoughts just on the gun grabbing part? And I guess that's very separate from the religious part. But if you take that away, that's what it was. The reason they could have been gun grabbing though was an excuse to attack a cult that they didn't like because it's weird, and the government wasn't that tolerant of them. But that was their justification. So, do you have any thoughts there?
I admit, guns. The issue of gun rights and gun grabbing, or and the government seizing people's firearms, that's a bit of a blurry issue for me. I suppose I'm still kind of in the argument about that, or I'm still learning where I particularly fall. Because I mean, philosophically speaking, I agree with gun rights. I think people should have the right to defend themselves, and I think people should have the right to acquire, means of defense. On the other hand, no one, there's obviously a line somewhere. So you and I, we're American citizens. We could probably go walk into a Walmart and get a gun, but we couldn't walk into a Walmart and get a nuclear weapon. You know what I'm saying? Now, as for the particulars on the raid, I mean, I suppose I would defend the raid insofar as people. Again, I mean, there has to be some line we have to draw in the sand with what individuals can have, and it is alarming. In what no matter whether you're really extremely pro or extremely anti Branch Davidian, I think it is alarming if a certain small group of people starts collecting a bunch of weapons. I mean, that is alarming both to the government itself and to society as a whole. And there is some, and this cult itself was, it preached eschatology, or in other words, the end of the world. That it was a cult that was obsessed with the end of the world. And so, we can't forget that. It's important. We can't. We need to be sure to try to prevent people who are trying to bring about the second coming of Christ. I mean, the people who are militias are definitely a threat.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I don't find that convincing is because even if they were stockpiling weapons, which, well, I mean, even that they were stockpiling weapons, and they are an organized group, that they're a community, but they weren't doing anything alarming with them, you know? And the people who currently hoard all the weapons and work as a group is the government. Um, and I think the people at Waco were probably very aware that if they decided to do a full-on rebellion of some sorts, they would get wiped out just like the way that they ended up getting wiped out. You know, because their firepower compared to the ATF and FBI was so inadequate. You know, because we saw that during the siege. Even if they wanted to shoot back, they were going to get mowed down. It would have been brutal. Well, it was brutal. So I, I I'm a Second Amendment absolutist in the sense that I'm okay with anybody owning things. I'm only not okay with it when they use it to harm people. And the people at Waco hadn't harmed anybody yet. And if you make the argument, well, they're a group of people that's large and they had a lot of guns, you're kind of accusing them of thought crime. They have the potential to do something scary, so we're going to treat them like they're going to do something scary, whether they are or not. And
I would only add.
I'm not convinced they were going to do anything bad, even if they were a crazed cult.
I would only add. No, it's not so much. It's actually less about the guns in some sense, and more about the belief that the world will come to an end any day now, and Christ will bring the kingdom of heaven on earth, and the non-believers will be cast to hell.
But it's still thought crime. It's still thought crime. They still haven't done anything. They just believe these wacky things.
Well, no. I'm not I'm not. It's the same thing. Well, okay. Is it thought crime to fight against ISIS because ISIS wants to bring about a world caliphate?
Well, I mean, if ISIS is saying that stuff but weren't killing people, then yeah, it would be thought crime. And the Branch Davidians hadn't killed anybody. You know, that's why it's such a sticking point. They hadn't done anything, so I don't even think they're I think their beliefs are interesting because that's why they're ostracized. And David Koresh definitely abused his authority, but I don't think their actual beliefs were going to, I don't think their beliefs were a problem here. Like, sure, I don't agree with them for a reason. Like, I'm not a Branch Davidian. I'm not. But I don't think you can convict them of actions they haven't done.
Oh, well, no, but their beliefs certainly are a problem because, again, it's about. I mean, this kind of goes back to I keep bringing up Hitchens for some reason, but the subtitle of his book, "How Religion Poisons Everything." I guess I might get into a little short religion rant here, if you don't mind. I mean, you're right. The Branch Davidians had not committed any. They except perhaps the crime, the crime according to the government at least of having weapons they shouldn't have. They hadn't organized militias. They hadn't committed any crimes. But you cannot dismiss the radical, not the radical, the insane beliefs and how insane beliefs can lead to insane actions. You can't throw someone in jail. Like for David Koresh, I don't think we could have thrown him in jail just because he preached that he had he was on a direct mission from God. I don't think you can throw people in jail for that. But that is a concern for society as a whole. I apologize for I didn't mean to make the exact comparison between ISIS and the Branch Davidians. But I mean, ISIS is just a easy example of how religion can be extremely destructive. I mean,
so I have an interesting thought, and I don't know if it's something that you've thought about a lot. I don't know how relevant it is in these conversations or if it's even mentioned. Hey, I don't know how familiar you are with Jonathan Haidt's work, and he wrote The Righteous Mind. And even though it's not the main part of his work, well, it kind of is. He talks a lot about post hoc rationalizations, and when we talk about religion and radicals, I think a lot of people like Sam Harris and Hitchens attribute a lot of bad things that people do that are religious to the religion because those people who are religious cite their religion. But that doesn't mean that a lot of those people wouldn't have done crazy things without the religion. It's like this religion poisoned them to do it. And it's like, well, a lot of people who are in the Middle East and have had terrible things happen to them at the hands of Western civilization because they've been bombed by the United States since the 80s, they're very susceptible to messaging that says they're evil. And a lot of that messaging is tied together with a lot of radical Islamic messages, right? So they're already susceptible to this because they know a bunch of people who've died. A ton of people have been killed that they know, or they know an uncle who's died, or they know that they can't get a job because places keep getting destroyed because of the United States government. Then a guy walks up and he says, Western civilization is evil. Here's Islam. These people are, infidels. And in the name of Islam, we are going to attack them. And it's like, well, is Islam really the reason why they attacked us? Or are they radical Islamists because that's the best way to use these people? I guess what I'm saying is, would they still be bombing us if we didn't bomb them for decades that set them up to be susceptible to this religious message? And the thing that I think is that if you abolish religion, it was just an alien concept. I think a lot of these people would be radicalized by just something different. I don't think it's uniquely religious and why they're attacking it. It's just the means. It's the tool. Now that's I just think that's interesting when we talk about how religious messages can be scary. He's preaching the end of the world. That's scary. We've seen religion used to justify terrible things before. And it's like, well, are these people just susceptible to any messaging and religion's the tool? Does that make it all religion's fault? So I'm just, that's a big thought out there, and I don't know how much you've thought about it. That's what I've been thinking about a lot lately as I've learned more about U.S. foreign policy historically.
Okay, I have heard that many times actually, so I'm going to try to refrain from taking too long to answer your question. I mean, I think that's, I think we're almost talking on two different fronts, though. I mean, I'm not the, I am the least likely candidate to defend much of American foreign policy. So obviously there have been examples of us supporting, radical Islamic theocracies. There have been examples of us, committing, there have been military actions we've done, which I'm sure have radicalized the population. But you also can't, I mean, I just don't understand that argument because it seems to start from the premise of, well, no, it can't be religion's fault. It has to be something else. It's and for some reason it's when religions evolve, people always have to come to its defense and be like, no, it's politics. It's not religion. Religion's pure. It's politics. We wouldn't have ICE if it weren't for bombing. If it weren't for horrible foreign policy in the part of the United States, Islam would not be as terrible as it is. But then you can go back to the history of Islam. I mean, and Muhammad was a general. Muhammad was a military man. And there's a martial quality built into Islam from the beginning. The point of that Voltaire quote is to say that if you can convince someone to behave or to believe something irrational, someone is more likely to behave irrationally. And I was to bring up the Branch Davidians again, that they believe that the end of the world was coming, that it was any day now, that the world was just going to cease to exist as we know it. Now, what we can acknowledge that how horrible the ATF and the FBI behaved, but it also has to be admitted that a group that believes the world is coming to an end is more likely to act in such a way as to increase the mayhem, which supposedly will fulfill the prophecy that the world's coming to an end now. So it's not just these are crazy wacky people in a bubble. They have no plan to do anything with their beliefs. They just have crazy beliefs. Leave them alone. Well, no, it's these people have crazy beliefs, and they could and there's a certain and there's quite a strong chance that they could harm many people around them. And I haven't even begun to talk about the harm that the Branch Davidians, or that they would have been committed by one Branch Davidian against another Branch Davidian.
Okay, so I have a lot to task with because I have.
Sorry for the impassioned rant.
No, you're fine. I just have like four separate. Well, I have like two different branches of thought, and I have to be careful not to lose the second one once I go into the first. So you started off talking about how religion, and the way I defended it, it makes it sound like I'm trying to avoid blaming religion. And like I guess the reason why I'm saying that is I understand that historically it's been used to justify things like in the Crusades. I'm just not convinced that applies to the modern day, even though that happened historically. And I think it's because when people when people try to explain that, they attack us because they hate us, because they just don't like us, because they don't like that we're Western people and we do these things that are against their religion. I just find it very unpersuasive when there's a simpler explanation. The simpler explanation is they're impoverished, we're not, and then they know that we're partially a cause of that because we're fighting them or fighting an area adjacent to them, and we've caused a lot of direct harm. And it seems like that direct harm is setting people up to be receptive for an excuse to attack us. It's not that it's not that I can't imagine a scenario in which a religious person didn't think of those things and they just said, yeah, we just hate them because gay people can get married there, whatever. Let's blow some stuff up. Like, I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm just saying the more reasonable solution, or the more likely solution, involves them experiencing their whole life as a kid and seeing bad things happen to people and then going from there. And like a lot of the people who are radicalized in like their teenage years, and they're all these men who are hyper testosterone, So it seems not really that it's a founded scholarly thing. That's the way that I've observed it. But I'm not saying, yeah, the Crusades. I'm not going to go on and say, yeah, the Crusades were really because these other people attacked them first. Although I'm sure there are a lot of things that were just people used to fight over land a lot more, and war was more common in a brutal way. And if you could rally people by citing religion, it doesn't necessarily mean religion caused it. Although I'm sure religion has caused plenty of wars, and plenty of tension between the Sunnis and the Shiites today is still because of religion, and I get that. But it seems like writing all of it away as religion is crazy. But now I'm going to go into the more relevant train of thought to the second part you said, and that is more talking about specifically people who believe dogma that is preached to them are willing to act on that dogma in ways that's ridiculous. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, in general, dogmatism can apply to a lot of things beyond just religion. I think it applies to statism, and I think in those Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson debates, something that they kind of both agreed on a little bit to some extent was that Sam Harris would attack religion, and I think Jordan Peterson tried to broaden it out to dogmatism. And in a way, I think that's kind of what I'm doing. I think people are dogmatic in a lot of ways, and that can lead to irrationality and to doing harmful atrocities. I think that's definitely true. So, and I'm not going to pretend like the Branch Davidians don't have potential to do something crazy based on their beliefs. But the thing is, they hadn't done anything crazy yet. So I don't really think any action should be taken against them, because up to that point, they had acted peacefully. And even if they had a large amount of weapons, they weren't doing anything with them. So it's hard to justify anything. I think it's pretty hard to defend the ATF's actions. And that's why, in general, I'm against nonviolent crime, is because you have to, they aren't hurting anybody, and you want to separate them from people they know and they love and their jobs and whatnot, and then put them in a cage when they haven't hurt anybody. Even if you think they might hurt anybody, they should have to do that before you can use that level of force on a person. So yeah, so once again, I guess I'm leaving you with a strand of things to comment on. So take that however you want.
You can hear me, right? Yeah. I mean, I suppose in some sense I am pulled in two slightly different directions. Or maybe we all are to some extent. In the sense that, in my perfect world, or if I, well, how do I put it? I mean, I wish people, would stop being religious. Like, I don't think anyone should be religious, but, I'm not the dictator of the world. Thank the Lord. No pun intended. And, I can't control how people think and behave. And I also think that people have the right to make their own decisions. People, I mean, they even have the right to join crazy cults. I mean, Scientology is a good example. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the horror stories. I mean, the people Joe Rogan's interviewed on his podcast about crazy, the craziness of Scientology, and there's definitely shady stuff going on there. And the issue, I guess, for me is when the cult or the religion starts to interfere with other people's rights. So, for example, at the time, I don't think they knew, the FBI and the ATF either didn't know or didn't have enough information involving David Koresh's relations with younger girls in his circle. But that would have been, in my view, if they had that information at the time and they could lay it out. Again, I don't think they did. I think that could have been an example of the government saying, okay, we got to step in to save these children. If he's sexually abusing the children.
But that would have been a reason to step in and arrest David Koresh when he's not at his compound, when they know he leaves his compound regularly, take him in and say, hey, we're putting these charges against you because we're thinking you're harming kids. That's still not an excuse to attack a compound and bring dozens and dozens of armed people.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, I just want to clarify, because that's what happened at Waco, and I don't want people to think you defending cops' actions against David Koresh, if he was a child molester. I didn't want people to accidentally confuse that with you defending the raid of Waco's compound versus maybe just arresting him. Because I agree, like, if those allegations are against him, they should arrest him, but they shouldn't raid the compound where, dozens of people live. And I do think that gets a little bit away from the religious part. Like, yeah, I do agree that is where he starts harming others. Okay, so maybe we're in agreement on that. I guess I'm failing to see where the cult, other than that, essentially starts infringing on anybody else's rights. I guess because it seemed like that's where you wanted to take that argument. So if David Koresh, wasn't a child molester and there's no allegations of that, is there any way they're infringing on others?
I mean, again, that's where the line starts to blur. I mean, I don't think if David Koresh had not been molesting children, so say he had a squeaky clean record other than believing in, crazy ideas, supposing there was, there was no funny business going on, and let's even just take the arms out of the equation. Suppose they had no illegal firearms as well. They were completely law-abiding religious organization. They just believed crazy things. I don't think you can bring legal force against them. Now, I think society should frown upon groups like that, but I don't think you can bring legal force against them justifiably.
See, So I have this. I guess to some degree I'm conflicted a lot less than you are on a certain topic because I personally have no problem with other people. Well, and when I say no problem, I mean if anybody believes anything, I don't care. Like they can. It doesn't bug me until it materializes in any kind of societal issues. So if somebody being religious makes them happier, then anybody who does a utilitarian calculus in the world should say, well, that's a plus because this person now lives a more fulfilled life because of something they believe that I don't believe in. So that's why I'm not critical of it in that way. And it seemed like you were, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seemed like you implied that you still wouldn't want those people to be religious. Now, I know that religious people should hate when I say this because it makes it sound like I'm talking down to them and saying, good for you, you believe in lies and you're happy because of it. Ha ha ha, those dumb people. And I'm not trying to say that, but if it makes them happy because they can bring themselves to believe in it, then I think that's good. It's like I don't believe in it just because I'm not that. I don't have. I wasn't raised that way. I don't have predispositions that make me believe in anything supernatural or be beyond our human bodies. But if they do, I think that's great. Unless it's like negatively impacting me in other ways. That's why I think dogmatism, like statism, is so much worse because statism actively imposes on every paycheck I get and everything I can do when I leave my house. So that's why I think it's. I guess I don't really spend a lot of time hating on religion because it's not the most dogmatic thing that I think negatively impacts my life. Um, so, but just to buy you a little bit more time to think on that, and but before I go down too many more rabbit holes, um, I get where you're coming from when you start talking about kids, but I think the kids are a completely separate issue in of itself. That's the only place where I get blurry at all. Is but then I don't think religion is that separate from somebody just being a bad parent. If a kid gets inculcated with crazy religious beliefs, is that much different than a kid just having a terrible parent that's like really bad at helping them with school and it's just a negative influence? Um, so I still even find it hard to justify doing anything about that because I think that's something that it seemed like you were thinking about bringing up earlier, but kind of shied away from.
Um, I suppose I should harp a little more on the question of, if or would I want the people who gain who bring who would I want the people who gain some sort of happiness or gain more contentment or fulfillment in religion, would I want them to not be religious? Well, and again, as I said, I mean, at some level it's an individual decision. So at some level, it doesn't really matter what I think. It matters what each individual thinks, and I don't think I shudder at anyone who tries to force other people to believe what they believe. So I don't want to force people to not be religious. I people need the freedom to look at the issues on their own and decide, okay, I'm going to be a Catholic or an atheist or a Muslim. And I suppose, I mean, and the funny thing is, I mean, I can't imagine a world without religion. So it's almost like the question of a world without religion is just doesn't come up for me because I just can't imagine it. It's such a part of the human character. It's not a part that I like, but it's such a part of the human character that I just I don't really think about, well, what would the world be like without religion? I just think, well, the world has religion, and quite often it has negative implications. Sometimes it has positive implications. I would say the negative far outweighs the positive, but that is what it is, and we have to, we have to acknowledge how the world is before we can better it in any way.
You just reminded me why. Well, one of the many reasons why I don't like central planning. And it's because you made that claim that you think the negatives outweigh the positives on the net. And I think I would agree with that, probably based on really weird arguments. But I think that shows, I think that partially reveals why I'm a postmodernist. Because I think by my calculation, it ends up being this, but any other person can make any other calculation, and I can't really tell them they're wrong because I'm making my calculation based on my intuitions. And their intuitions could be different and say, well, I value all these individuals who feel like they have more meaning because of it, and those amount of people are in the millions. So that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make. And it's like, well, then everybody has to make trade-offs on their own. So that's why I know that's not related in the sense that no government could actually force everybody to not believe or to believe. So it's not really a related thing to central planning. But I think it's a funny, I guess, way of looking at things and how I think it could relate to that, at least hypothetically. Now I was, and that's kind of part of the whole religious messaging that I kind of wanted to get at too, is if somebody showed up and explained to you a utilitarian calculus where they said, hey, we broke these things down in a way that you would agree with, so they could read your mind and they knew your intuitions and your preferences. And for some reason, I guess what I'm trying to pull out of you is how important is the fact that you think the religion is wrong. So if they could show you utilitarian calculus where religion actually did, in your estimation, do a positive on the world, but it was based on things that you thought were almost certainly as you don't believe in things now, were almost that wrong, would you still be disgusted with it? Or are you, as a person who is more in favor of that kind of way of looking at things, as a ends person and not necessarily a means person, what would that sway you at all if in the hypothetical universe in which religion did the opposite thing? And I would prefer if you didn't dodge the question by saying endemic to religion is these negative things. I'm just curious on the truth value and how important that is.
Well,
I am putting you on the spot, but I think it's been simmering in my head mostly because as we were talking about the Branch Davidians, you seemed like specifically upset by how wild their thoughts were. It's like, okay, that's ridiculous. You guys are crazy. So it's like if people thought really crazy things, but it somehow did have a net positive, would you, the utilitarian, be able to defend it or not?
I mean, I don't know how much of a dodge you'll think this is, but, I don't see, in the world we live in, I don't see that utilitarian calculus. I don't see the proof of that utilitarian calculus. But as for the truth value, it is very important to me. I think I try in my life at least to not believe things purely on faith, or not. And by faith I just mean not believing, kind of just assuming something is true or hoping something is true. I don't always succeed, but I try to look at evidence. I try to reason my way through. I try to look at arguments. I try to take them apart. I try to, so as much as is possible for a human being to do so, I try to use my reason to govern my life. I think that's one of the better parts of being human is we have this capacity. And this is kind of what the Enlightenment taught us. The Enlightenment said, you don't have to listen to the state. You don't have to listen to church. All you have to listen to is your reason. So, I mean, if that were true, I suppose we might be having a slightly different conversation. Although it doesn't because I'm stuttering. Even if you could prove that it somehow bettered everyone's lives, again, I don't think you can. That does not make it true. So that there's two different things going on there. In other words, there's the utility of it, there's how useful it is, and there is the factual nature of its claims. And I just don't, I don't know how if you are familiar with pragmatism and with William James, which is kind of where Peterson falls on religion. He thinks it's useful, and therefore, he defends it. And I just don't think I don't see the usefulness of religion.
Okay, okay. I kind of Well, if you're gonna ask me, was that a dodge of my question? I think I would say yes, because I think I did say imagine a different hypothetical universe, and then you started the answer with, in our world today, I can't see that happening. So here's my answer. So I'll say that's a dodge, but that's okay. I still got an answer. I guess what I was trying to do is I was trying to force you into talking about an issue you don't like to see if I can trick you into being a Kantian about caring about the means, and I kind of could when the means is truth, because it's the reason why it's so not convincing to anybody when people point at those polls and say like Christian people self-report being happier, blah blah blah. And it's like, look at these people who live by these Christian values and they're happy. You should just be a Christian. It's like, that's not how it works. You can't just turn around and be like, they're happier, I'm going to be happier, I'm a Christian now. Because there has to be something intrinsic. And that's kind of the where things have to be true, at least true to you. So in a way, I feel validated because I feel like it did make you care about means, even if you imagine that world. But that would kind of put that answer in your mouth. But I guess we still got like 10 or so minutes to probably talk about this issue, or of Waco as a whole, because this is the big Waco episode, no matter how many rabbit holes we go down. I have one really, really random thought that's hardly Waco related, but it was just very apparent to me watching Waco, the documentary. Do we want to go down that rabbit hole, or do you have something else you want to talk about at all? No? Okay. So part of what I loved about this documentary is it shows these congressional testimonies, and the people say things, and then it immediately cuts to the evidence on why what they're saying is false. So it shows an ATF agent, and they're like, we did not shoot at all. And then it cuts to them, and here's them shooting at people. Here's clips. Here's them attacking a reporter who's trying to take pictures. Look, they're covering stuff up. I'm going to totally go off the rails with a completely different thought now, with how one of the problems with the rule of law in general is the rule of law is not, what's the word? It's not used on everybody equally, right? So like you and I could both do a crime, but maybe one of us wouldn't get charged for whatever reason. So the example that came to mind while watching this Waco documentary is all these people are lying. All these ATF agents know that what they're saying is not true, and they are covering it up. And luckily for them, the whole compound burned down. And luckily for them, they sabotaged taking evidence and of the bodies, because they just cut off the power to it. So they're not going to be tried for perjury because the government has no incentive on trying them for perjury. But if the government wants somebody to comply with them, they'll charge people with perjury unless they act in certain ways. And it shows that you can have a law that makes sense, but then the government uses it in these absolutely ridiculous ways by only applying it when they feel like it. So that just became apparent to me because I'm looking at all these people who are, talking throughout this documentary that are on a stand during a hearing, and it's like all of these people are liars. Pretty much every single one of them was a liar that worked for the ATF. But I don't think they're all in prison right now. So I don't know how much thought you've put into like the laws that exist aren't actually used necessarily for good. Even if you could justify the law, is the government not applying them to everyone inherently unjust? Because it's like, I get why for practical purposes you want perjury there, because you don't want people to be able to just lie on the stand. But all these people are going to lie after they've sworn an oath and not face repercussions because the government doesn't have a reason to. And that struck me as very gross.
The rule of law is something which is kind of a foundation of a liberal worldview. I only bring that up because that was my ideology for a while, not any longer. And I mean, I still hold a a candle to that idea. I mean, it kind of goes back to, I think, something we talked about last episode, which is I don't think the rule of law is always used correctly, but I think it can be a very good way to handle a populace, and I think it can be. It's a good ideal to go after.
So what I think I was realizing when I thought about this is the rule of law has potential to be all these things that we can agree like that's really bad. We don't want to condone it, but it's the state. The state has all these rules that they can enforce selectively, and then of course they abuse it. So if you imagine like you and I were talking yesterday. I mean, well, not yesterday, but last week's episode. We were riffing on. I was riffing on the fact that how do you trust all this power in rulers when history shows us that our rulers aren't typically benevolent? So I get why all these things should be illegal if we had benevolent rulers who are enforcing them equally. But we clearly live in a world where that does not happen. So now I'm sitting here thinking, why should we have perjury if it's only going to be used on certain people? And even a more extreme example. This is a thought I had listening to a different podcast, and they mentioned it. But some podcaster was explaining why they were kind of weirded out by everything going on with the Harvey Weinstein legal case. Because if the casting couch is this famous phenomenon where all these studio heads have been doing gross things to women, then why is only Harvey Weinstein the face of Me Too? Why aren't there a bunch of executives also getting arrested for doing similar things? Why haven't people been coming out against other people if it's a known cultural gross thing about Hollywood? It's only Harvey, though. So it's like, is there a reason it's only getting applied to Harvey? Are other people just not speaking out? Or is Harvey going down because that culture is still alive and well, and they're just making it look like it's being stopped, and they're putting a lid on it? So I guess what I'm saying is I don't trust the government to enforce the law on these things that we can all clearly agree are wrong, and it makes me really uncomfortable, and it makes me lose faith in the rule of law as a whole. Not that I really believed much of what the state does, anyways, but it totally destroys the credibility of the rule of law, knowing that the practitioners are always going to misapply it. So yeah, so some more stuff I'm just throwing at you, unsuspected. You just you can work with that.
I mean, that's kind of I suppose if you take this from a historical perspective, I mean, that's kind of the nature of the beast. I mean, the laws quite often are created by the rulers for the rulers, instead of for the people by the people, and that's that is a serious issue which has to be dealt with, and which is why if I can say one more thing, which is why I think that increased democracy would help prevent that.
Okay, but even if the people came up with the laws, because I'm saying laws that aren't controversial, like Harvey Weinstein should go to prison by anybody's calculus if you remotely believe a state should exist. But even if the laws were by the people, isn't the state always going to misapply them? You can't force the state to do that unless you're the state. And the people aren't literally going to be running the government. More democracy just means more direct picking of the leaders. That doesn't mean they're going to be all of a sudden the golden leaders. I just don't think who's picking the laws matters. And I don't even think they need to be writing the laws. I think they're going to misuse whatever ones you put in front of them, even if they're reasonable. Because perjury is something that everybody would support. If you laid it out, you're like, yeah, we don't want people lying on the stands. We want fair testimony, all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but then the government uses it as a tool to bludgeon people into complying with things once they're worried about going to prison. So they find ways to take these things that we could agree on and just bludgeon them into weapons for the state. And I don't think it matters if it's the state coming up with the thing like perjury or the people.
Well, what I mean is that I think that if more people are allowed to have a say, if more people are allowed to, not so much. well, perhaps crafting the laws, although that's not quite what I was getting at. I just mean if more people were enfranchised, if more people were able to play or able to work in the system, which really is not possible at the moment. I think the disparity between the ideal of the rule of law and the abuse that or and the abuse rulers make of it would shrink. I mean, for example, and I'm kind of just riffing off about this off my head, but for example, I mean, if we had a better, if the mainstream media was more about checking the state rather than being in bed with the state, I think that would decrease the hypocrisy that we see, because we'd be the media would be pointing out every time, or it should be pointing out every time that the state does something hypocritical. And if if the media kept pointing it out, and the average Joe kept hearing about it, that would, I think, instigate some real change.
Okay, so I understand that point, and it's somewhat compelling to me, but I think where it loses me is I think life is very gray. So like there are plenty of times people are corrupt and nobody knows about it because people are uneducated. Because there are people in our government now who blatantly have enriched people that they are friends with, and most people don't know about it, even though you could plaster it up there. It's all public knowledge, right? But I'm more concerned not even about the blatant corruption, but like the gray areas, because when the government decides to leverage this perjury trap against a person, they don't do it for no reason. They genuinely believe that they need to put somebody in a cage, and then they say, like, okay, we're gonna get this person, we're gonna scare him with this charge to get him to comply because we need to do that. And then when they don't charge FBI agents or CIA agents who have lied during congressional testimony, it's because, well, we can't make every national security expert afraid to testify. We can't scare them if we retroactively give everybody who's ever testified, a perjury trial where we put them on cages for lying to us because they always end up lying. So they end up going in there with good intentions, and then they end up justifying ways to misapply it. I don't think a lot of people who are overlords I don't think they wake up one day and say, I can't wait to abuse this power. I think they show up thinking they're a good person, and then they say, how can I leverage these tools that I have, which are the laws at my disposal, to get the optimal outcome that I'm looking for? And that's why prosecutors throw 100 charges at one defendant, because they want that defendant to go in a cage, and then they know at least one of them is going to stick when the person pleads down, or something to that sort. The prosecutor doesn't sit there and think I'm an awful person, even though I think they should. They do it because of their utilitarian calculus in their head, is thinking, well, I want this person. I think this person has earned prison time, so that's how I'm going to throw these tools at them. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think education helps because it's hard to educate people about a gray thing. And if you have gray things that are being used sometimes right, sometimes wrong, I'm okay with individuals doing that when they hang out because you can choose who you associate with, what businesses you want to contract with. But when the state does it, you don't have a choice of operating with the state because the state's got ultimate control over you because they can take your property and they can take you. And that's why, to me, the only solution rings have a state that doesn't even have those powers. That's why that's the obvious answer to me, and every other thing doesn't seem like a strong enough check, because I don't think there is a strong enough check, except completely dissolving to some extent and actually putting real limitations beyond like our current limitations that we have, which I don't really believe are limiting at all. I don't know if you find that as a suitable rebuttal, but those are my thoughts.
I mean, well, let me just. I guess all I have is really just a quick clarification. I guess by education, I don't. I assume you're not referring so much to the systematic education, but just as an increase of information, right?
Well, yeah, will be because a lot of people like
That's
have
what I meant.
yeah, they have information at their disposal. Like a book dropped that called Profiles in Corruption that I mentioned last week that shows all these weird histories of Democrats, and it's like, ooh, that's sketchy. But how many people read it? Like a lot of people, but not the whole voting populace, you know. I think that raises a separate thing, which when I sent you that Jesse Ventura video, like we're not going to talk about that now, but a lot of things that came to mind were how educated do you think a voter should be, and how do you figure out trading that off with enfranchising more voters? Um, and we'll have that conversation another time. But yeah, sorry for just going on that another rant in the middle of your asking for clarification. Sorry.
No, I got the answer I wanted. I mean, I clarified what I needed to. As I said, it's not so much about educating, educating people better in school as just having more information out there. So as much information. Let me put it like this: when it comes to things like what the government does, I think the government should release as much information as is possible at any given time, barring specific things which could harm the countries. So you're not gonna I'm sure there are some things, like a few things, that have to be kept top secret, but I think most things should be within the realm of documented evidence or documented history, and that the journalists and just the average citizen should be able to know pretty much what's going on. So and every military action, for example, should be kept. There should be it should the public should know about every military action the government commits. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there's like a dozen things. I always want to say a dozen things. It's probably the curse of just being a contrarian that's opinionated, and I'm always highly caffeinated during this conversation, so I'm just going on tirades. But I think this is a good point to jump off, and I'm sure. Oh my God, yeah. I think all the objections I'd have to that are kind of fruitless because we just go on 10-minute rabbit holes where we like agree to disagree, and I love having them. They're always fun, but let's not do it right now because we're an hour in. So I'm glad we talked about Waco. I'm glad you're aware of Waco now, just because I think it's a hugely historical event. And when I listened to the audiobook while I was at work a few months ago, the first one I heard, wow, I was just getting blown away by it. But yeah, I'm glad we in general agree on like at least that was handled grossly. I'm glad you didn't come in here defending what Chuck Schumer said in the documentary. If you did that, I would have been pissed. I would have been like, okay, I don't know if I can respect you anymore. because he's like, okay, guys, let's not hate on the ATF. All they did was kill a bunch of kids. Yeah. But that was fun. We're gonna hopefully come back with another episode next week. We're hoping to stick with doing these regularly. Feel free to find me on Twitter at MattKeckBlog. You can find my friend here, Matthew, on YouTube at The Anti-Philosopher. And yeah, I don't know what we're going to talk about next week. We'll talk about more democracy probably. And do you have any parting thoughts? No? Okay,
I can't think so. I mean, all the usual shameless plugs: like, share, subscribe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate that you listen to us talk about Waco, and by Waco I mean 30 minutes arguing about Islam, because I guess that's how it works now. But yeah, see you guys next week. Thank you.